I just got to say, you all are good singers. Man, woo, it's fun to sing with you all. So thank you for lending your voice with the angels this morning, because the Lord is here. He is in this place. Amen. Welcome to Boat to Church Sunday. I hope you got here on your boat. We're not doing bike to church just because we've had so much rain, but it is really soggy out there, and thanks for coming to join us here in this nice dry place. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're feeling rested. We are in the 4th week of our rest series. I hope your sump pump is working and the basement is not full of water, because I know for some people this has not been an easy stretch of time. And if you work in agriculture or you're a farmer, our hearts go out to you, because I know this is a difficult season. And certainly want to pray for you and walk with you and care for you in this time. But I'm just grateful for our church community and the way in which we can do that for each other, that we're not alone in our struggles and in our joys. We hope that you've been learning a lot through this series about the rhythm that God has given us, the 6-in-1 rhythm, and what it looks like in your life might be different than it does in mine. But I think it's really been a helpful season for us to just focus on rest. And why would we as a church spend 4 weeks doing this? What has God shown you? What has God taught you? What's changing maybe in your patterns and in your life? I hope there's things that you're feeling stirred to do differently. Certainly as a teaching team, while Eric is on sabbatical for about another month or so, it's been a different way for us to do a series. We've been able to rotate around, so I was able to go to Yoder last week, and I'm here, and next week I'll be back in McPherson again after this series. So it's a great way to reconnect with people from all across our campuses, but it honestly has also given our teachers some rest, to focus on teaching one message and to be able to share that as best we know how in each location. So thanks for bearing with us in that, and I hope it's been a blessing to you to get to hear from different people. But I want to start today kind of where we've started probably every week with this series, and that's in the beginning. Right? But I want to talk about that just a little bit differently, because if you replay the 7 days of creation and kind of walk through that with me in your mind, right? All the essentials of life are given to us in that 6 days, right? If we walk through that, we have the light comes out of the darkness. The water and the sky separate. Land begins to form. Vegetation takes root and sprouts. Birds, fish, animals, right? And then we get to human beings. And then the 7th day. And what does God do on that 7th day? He rests. And we often think of that as like, well, God must have been tired, or he's out of ideas. You know, he made the elephants. They're funny looking. Now what do I do, right? I don't know what. But I think God's purpose in that rest is so much bigger than just a break. He wasn't just stopping, but he was actually showing us. He was modeling for us what the rhythm of life is to look like. He gave us sun, water, air, food, companionship, and rest. And he didn't give us this rest by a decree. God didn't say, and now you must rest. He did it by demonstration. He rested. Right? And those 7 days, the first days were good, right? And God said it was good. On the 6th day, what did he say? And it was very good, right? So I think that's something about the ways in which all of creation was now working together in harmony. And then on the 7th day, what does he say? He made it holy. God blessed the 7th day and made it holy. And God didn't escape from all that he had made. He didn't run off to the shore and just kind of get away from everything. He didn't take a vacation, right? He didn't just sleep in. What did God do? He immersed himself in all that he had made and saw that it was not just very good, it was holy. He enjoyed it. He had what I call an intimate immersion in creation. And he practiced Sabbath that way. I think that's something we should learn from as well. That God rests and delights in what he has made, for it is indeed holy. You know, my kids, they're now in late elementary school, but over the last 5-6 years, we've had a lot of art projects come home. And if you're in that stage of life, you're going, what do I do with all this, right? If you're like us, we try to put that up. It goes on our refrigerator. Maybe you have a refrigerator full of some artwork of your kids. I don't put those things up because my kids are the next great artists. They're not going to be worth money someday. Why do we do this? Why do we put these things on display? Well, as I thought about that, it's really because I love the Creator. I love the one who made it. And even if it's not a great piece of art, it's a reflection of what they're capable of, what their gifts are. And so I think that's something we can learn from as well. That God, He made all of this for us, right? For us to enjoy and to use. But the way we take care of it also is a reflection of our love for our Creator. The way in which we rest and observe how all that God has made and what it means to us is a way in which we can also worship the Lord. You see, here's the thing. I find that rest leads to connection. When I slow down and I spend time with Jody, my wife, and my boys, I connect with them. When I slow down and I rest with God, God speaks. When I make time for others in my church community, I build relationships. But when I'm restless, when I am constantly going from here to there and doing this and that and the other, it leads to neglection. I fail to connect with my family, with my wife, with my church community, and I fail to connect with God. And so this rhythm that God has given us, it's something that I think we have to remember is a rhythm. It's not a rule. The rhythm of life is to see that God has made this pattern for our benefit, for our thriving. God didn't make the Sabbath to be oppressive. It wasn't meant to give us a bunch of rules that we have to follow. The Sabbath was made for humankind, not the other way around. And when we remember that, we start to practice it differently. Now, I thank God that I was raised in a community that Sabbath was something that many people did. That we had a rhythm to our life. I'm sure some saw it as a rule of life, where you couldn't mow and work in the garden and do some of those kinds of things. But the reality is what I grew up experiencing was that it was a rhythm, that it was good for me. That my family had laid some boundaries of what was going to be healthy and acceptable for us to thrive. And in that community, we stopped working. Many people went to worship, not everyone. And then we spent time doing other things. We rested. We played, but we didn't play in climate-controlled gyms with referees and scorekeepers with uniforms. We played outside, and we made new friends. And I thank God that I had that pattern to my life, and I strive to try to hold on to that, but I find that the world is changing around me, and maybe you do too. You see, in McPherson, as I live there with my boys, I've actually been called a bad parent because I'm keeping my child from playing Sunday sports. And they have untapped potential that I'm not allowing them to experience, right? That's hard, and I know many of you are probably living with that. How do I make choices? How do I navigate all of these things in my life? Students that are up here, I'm sure you guys have had to wrestle with those questions and choices yourself. And I'm sure at times it can feel like a rule of life, like, oh man, I can't do this, can't do that, rather than a rhythm to life. But I think God gave us this rhythm to help us, to benefit us. In fact, my parents, they encouraged me to get all my homework done on Saturdays so I couldn't procrastinate and work on Sundays. That's how they thought about it. I tried to procrastinate, like probably many of you have too. But God didn't do this. God worked in advance for our good. God created all the things we would need so that we would have these things to use for our benefit. I think of the ways in which that is so much more infinitely wise than the way we would have done it. And when I see the way in which we as human beings interact with creation, sometimes stories come out of that. About 60 years ago in the country of China, there was a leader there by the name of Mao Zedong. And Mao Zedong, he determined that their production of rice and the health of his country was in decline. And he decided he was going to make 4 pests the target of a campaign. He called it the 4 Pest Campaign, where he was going to try to eradicate mosquitoes, flies, sparrows, and rats. All things that were eating crops and causing health problems to his nation. Okay, so he makes this large campaign, encourages everyone to go out there and try to eradicate these pests. Of course, he was more successful in one particular species than the others. That was the sparrow. The sparrow was much easier for them to target. They could kill the sparrow, they could destroy nests and eggs, and they were able to actually be very, very successful in this campaign of reducing the amount of sparrows. But in 2 years, what do you think they found? Rice production went down. Community health went down. And all of a sudden, they had a realization. The sparrows aren't just eating rice, they're eating lots of insects. They're eating lots of things that are harmful to us and to the environment. It's actually considered one of the greatest ecological crises of our modern times. The choice to eliminate the sparrow from the country of China. This little sparrow, right? But it had so much to do with the entire good of its country. You see, it goes back to God creating each day and it being good and altogether very good. These things work together for our good. God's work was purposeful, just as his rest was purposeful. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just because God was tired. There was an explicit purpose. It was meant to refresh, to renew, to recreate us, so that when we enter into school, when we go to work, when we go about our weekly activities, we actually can be focused with energy and clarity and calling as to why we are in this place. Now here's the thing. An author that has been pivotal in this series wrote a book called Subversive Sabbath. His name is A.J. Swoboda, and he says this short little quote that keeps sticking with me. It says this. It says, "Rest is a gift we don't know how to receive." We have all sorts of excuses why we can't take that gift, don't we? I'm busy. We need more money. I've even known pastors like, well, the devil doesn't rest, so I can't either. Really? Slow down. Let God's rhythm of life, let God work while you rest. Right? We battle with this. We fight against our tendencies. You see, we tend to think solely about the Sabbath as how it affects me, don't we? We think about what I need right now. And we fail to remember that this Sabbath command was actually for all of creation. We see this in the Old Testament, that all of creation is called to rest. God knew this. He instructs the people to care for creation by giving it the rest it needs. In Exodus 23, verses 10 through 12, it says this: "For 6 years you are to sow your fields and harvest your crops, but during the 7th year let the land lie unplowed and unused. Then the poor among your people may get food from it, and the wild animals may eat what is left. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. 6 days do your work, but on the 7th day do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that your slaves and the foreigners living among you may be refreshed." Now, that's a different culture than what we live in today. I get that. But I think there are probably some things that we can still learn from it. You see, God designed this 6-in-1 rhythm so that life would thrive. All life, land, animals, and humans too. And they are working together. Remember, we are very good together. This weekly rhythm is also a yearly rhythm, a 6-in-1 cycle of a sabbatical year. And every 7 cycles in the biblical times was the 50th year, a year of Jubilee. And Jubilee is a time when all those who had been enslaved are set free. The debts, they're forgiven. Those who had sold land or had lost their land in indebtedness, it was returned to them. This rhythm was forgotten along the way by the Jews, and it never really entered into the Christian church. Instead, the early church, they adopted a kind of an idea in Acts chapter 2 that we would take care of everyone who's a part of us. When anyone has need, we'll sell what we have and we'll share. We'll care for each other. And that took care of kind of the need for one part of that commandment. But it never really talked about how we take care for creation. How do we provide rest for creation? What does that look like in today's day and age? Now, the law of Leviticus made it quite clear that the benefits of keeping this rhythm of rest and also the repercussions of not. Leviticus 26, in this one chapter, if you see at the very beginning of it, verses 3 through 5, talk about the benefits. And it says this: "If you follow my decrees and carefully obey my commands, I will send you rain in the season." Right? Sometimes more than we wish we got. "And the ground would yield its crops and the trees their fruit. Your threshing will continue until the grape harvest, and grape harvest will continue until planting. And you will eat all the food you want and live in safety in your land." Now, at the other end of that chapter, verses 33 through 35, it says, "But if you don't, I will scatter you among the nations and will draw out my sword and pursue you. Your land will be laid waste, and your cities will lie in ruins. Then the land will enjoy the rest it did not have during the Sabbaths you lived on it, while you are in the country of your enemies. Ouch. That's a prophetic word to the people, and it came to pass in the exile. Right? They lived in the land of their enemies, and the land lay dormant. It rested, waiting for their return. Now here in central Kansas, I think we have some concept of this, but the reality is this passage makes it very clear that the land will have its rest one way or another. Either by God's plan, if we obey and follow the way in which God has given us this rhythm of life, or by God's power. That doesn't sound so good, right? We struggle with that, but I think there's something we need to learn here. You see, in Kansas, we have this concept of letting the land rest, I think, pretty well, because we look around and we see the way in which farmers work hard to rotate their crops and let land lie fallow. But many more people across Journey's landscape don't understand that. We're disconnecting from the land. We live in different ways than we might have used to done so. We even find that people are disconnected and divided about how we're to do these kinds of things. What are the ways in which we can work proactively? And yet we see creative ways that people are working really hard. And I know for some of you in this room, you might be on different sides of these issues. Right? We see places around our communities. There's a farm right here in South Hutch, right? This simple abundance farm that's trying to create urban agriculture, right? Creating different ways in which people can get sustainable food. We know that the farmers all around us are working really hard to protect their land. They don't look at land as just a seasonal, but they look at the long view to understand the nutrients of the land, to understand how it's going to produce for them not just this year, but for many years and generations even to come. I thank you for thinking of that. We also look at the renewable energy, and I know there's a whole lot of debate in McPherson County and here in Reno County. What do we do with these things, these windmills and the solar farms and hydro technology? Are these good for us or not? Are there costs that we're willing to absorb or not? And I recognize that we might not be on the same page on that. I'm a sportsman, and I know that in hunting seasons and fishing limits, we try to protect wildlife and natural resources that we can use them for many generations to come. The irony of these kinds of things is I think we are actually better at letting the land rest than we are at resting ourselves. We're putting more systems and structures into place to protect those resources than we protect our own schedules. We were made to thrive when we have a work balance with rest, 6 and 1 rhythm. Jesus understood this. In fact, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is called the Lord of the harvest in Matthew chapter 9. 3 chapters later, the Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus understood work and rest. He was the Lord of work. He was the Lord of rest. And when ministry pressures got to be too much, what did he do? He retreated. He went away to be alone with his Father, to pray, to recharge, to renew, to find new purpose in what his ministry was. We can learn from his example, and we can learn from his creation itself. You see, creation doesn't hurry. Plants, animals, they understand the seasons, don't they? The sun, the moon, the stars, the tides of the sea, they give order to the days and they don't resist it. They know their part. They play their part. But as humans, we rush the process, don't we? We resist the order. We fight the seasons. I think of these new seasons, right? We grow more than 50% of the vegetables we eat are grown indoors nowadays. Climate-controlled environments allow us to do things that we would have normally stopped doing when it was getting too hot or too cold. Lighting and the technologies that we have now allow us to run 24/7 in our factories. 3 shifts, people working at all times to increase efficiency and production. And when there's a snowstorm, what do? We get out, we clean it up quick so we can get back to work. Creation doesn't function like that. Look around us and we see a different way of living. I think one of the best ways to replicate Jesus in learning how to rest is to do what God did on the seventh day. To take time for intimate immersion into the creation. To soak in the goodness of the Creator by soaking in the goodness of His creation. I've had a couple of experiences of this in my lifetime that I look back to, and I can see how pivotal they were and came at really important times in my life. When I was 17, I was getting ready to go into my senior year of high school. My dad took a month off from work, and we went on a road trip to Alaska. We drove through and camped in all the national parks along the way, and I remember as we got to Denali National Park in Alaska, 85 miles from any of the maintained roads, and we're camping there, and there's caribou on the tundra, and you just realize how small you are, and you figure out there's a bigger purpose, a bigger place that I must serve in this. That was pivotal before I went into my senior year of high school. It helped to reset some things in my life. It helped me reconnect with my dad by spending time in creation. After Jody and I got married, we took a canoe trip to the boundary waters of Minnesota. We paddled these crystal clear, very calm lakes. The fog rolls in the mornings, and you'd hear the loon, and it would echo off the rocks from the other side of the lake. You'd bang a paddle, and you'd hear it for miles. And it just reminded me of God's still small voice. It gave me a place to sit there in God's creation and just wonder, how did you put all this together, right? 3 years ago, I went on sabbatical, and I went to Montana in a wilderness area to try to hunt elk with critters that could eat me. People were like, "You're crazy. Why are you doing this?" And I was alone in this environment for 2 weeks. And being there reset a lot of things in my life. Helped me to remember what was most important, and God spoke to me in those places and reminded me of His promises. Now, I don't get to take these kinds of trips, and I'm sure many of you maybe don't even want to. But just going to the backyard or sitting in a park and taking time with God in creation can be so encouraging. You see, I think in nature we rediscover our purpose and our place in our Father's world. We remember that we're sustained by God's provision, not by our own human efforts. And our senses are heightened, and we become more childlike. Our imagination can run wild. I think of Leonardo da Vinci and his imagination when he saw the birds soaring, and what did he do? He tries to make a glider to see if he can fly. Didn't work. But the imagination was inspired by God's creation. Let creation encourage you, inspire you, teach you as you rest in it. The story of Job. I know for many people right now, if you might be able to identify with Job. If you're in the farming world, it feels like you're struggling. You're losing a lot of things. Job, of course, had lost his family, lost his wealth. His health was in pretty bad shape. He has these 3 friends who come and they give some pretty bad advice. And then he turns to them and he says this: "Just ask the animals and they will teach you. Ask the birds of the sky and they will tell you. Speak to the earth and it will instruct you. Let the fish and the sea speak to you. Which of all of these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In His hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind." Such wisdom from a guy who is really down. And yet he is able to look around and be taught by the goodness of God's creation. There are so many examples like this in the Psalms and the prophets, and even in the ways in which Jesus teaches us through His parables. One that I really love to look back to and I need to be reminded of often is in His Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 6, He's teaching to His disciples, and He says, "Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body and what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. Look up. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father cares for them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about your clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon, in all his splendor, was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you? Look at the flowers. And yet we stand in our closets, thumbing through clothes, trying on outfits, trying to figure out what should I wear this morning. Look at the flowers. Look at the birds. Let them teach you what it means to rest. From the biggest mountain to the smallest sparrow, creation can reveal so much truth to us if we simply rest in it. Take time today or sometime this week. I know it's kind of soggy outside. It might not be the best day. But to sit with God in creation. To find a place where you can intimately immerse yourself in all that God has made and let it speak to you. Let God speak to you through his goodness and his creation. A couple questions. How might you give rest to other people, to land, to animals? Again, I have wrestled with this question all week. And I find that it's pretty difficult for one person to give you all the applications for your own life. But I think if you sit with that, you'll begin to think about some ways in which you could adjust your life that would care for other people and allow them to have Sabbath rest as well. Or to think about land or animals. What would that look like? Second, what might God show you if you were to intimately immerse yourself in creation? Well, if you just sat with God for an hour in the park, what would he say? What would he show you? How might he teach you and instruct you? I hope you have that experience sometime this week and that you take time to jot down some thoughts as to what that is, because I think it would be different for each one of us. Here's the thing. In 6 days, God created everything that we needed, all the essentials for life. But I think it's the seventh day that gave it all meaning, that connected it all together. That's what we're trying to learn to practice. Because all of creation was made for us. And yet all of us are made for him. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you have given us such a gift in creation. Everything that we need and all of it reveals your glory. God, help us to take care of it, to enjoy it, to rest in it. Lord, teach us from the smallest of creatures and flowers what it means that you love us, that you care for us, that your grace is sufficient for us. Help us, Lord, to draw closer to you as we rest in you. We pray this in your holy name.